listeners from Western North Dakota. We get the men and women in blue are coming at you today, straight off the cuff. Beautiful spring morning, North Dakota. Good morning, Chief Dossinger.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Pretty good. I think that mic Mike's got it figured out for you there. A little bit of echo in the background. Really good. You know, normally we take some time, and I know we kind of break bread and do a little warm up and grease the wheels as these conversations go. But I think today will be one of our more popular recordings. With Attorney General Drew Wrigley in the house.
Yes, today's a very good turning point for our podcast. So welcome to Dickinson.
Well, you guys are generous. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation very much. It was a nice drive out, and I'm impressed by your studios here and your setup, and I look forward to the talk.
Yeah, it's amazing what tech can do. Mike, he can make anybody look good on camera.
He makes us look good. So
I only look 53 on camera. I'm actually 56. That's the lighting, I guess. But
he could take 10 pounds or 10 years off and 20 pounds off with just a click of the mouse. So, yeah. Good morning, Drew.
Yeah. Good morning.
Yeah. I mean, on a serious note, I know Chief and I we've been very excited about this for a while. Kind of took a little bit to get you tied down because you're a busy man now.
Well. It's a busy time for sure. I was mentioning before we went on air here that the last 6 weeks have been a bit of a black hole for a couple reasons. One, I'm starting off in this new job that I was in the process of running for, and I was very excited about running for the job in the wake of Attorney General Stenehjem's announcement that he wouldn't be seeking re-election. Well, then, as we all know, he tragically passed away shortly after that. And, so it's been a period of, engaging in the work, because the work has to go on, of the Attorney General's office. And then also, on a personal note, myself, my family, and the family of the Attorney General's office. Everybody's very much still in mourning. It's a loss of a good friend and a leader and somebody that we all cared about personally and professionally.
So some of those locally here that are going to be listening, so how are the formalities of that? You stepping into this role with, obviously the unfortunate passing of Wayne. How does that play out now for the remainder of this year?
Well, under the Constitution of North Dakota, if a statewide official either vacates by resignation or by death, then the governor of the state then has the authority and the obligation to appoint a successor. And in this instance, there was 1 year remaining on the term that Attorney General Stenehjem was serving, and so I've been appointed to serve out the remainder of that term through November, or actually the term runs through the end of this calendar year. But the position is on the ballot in November. And I was already a candidate for Attorney General and remain a candidate. Although I said my candidacy, I haven't been doing any campaigning in the wake of taking office. And it's one of the things that the governor, when we sat down and spoke after in the time period after Wayne's funeral, to talk about this possibility, is one of the questions the governor had for me. I mean, he said, "I know you're campaigning." I was campaigning full time, and I had set everything else aside for that because it's a serious undertaking. I was driving everywhere across the state, but I made clear that the work comes first. I mean, you've got it's an enormous set of responsibilities, especially starting like this, not after a campaign, but just abruptly to take this on is a little bit like parachuting into a war zone and having to figure out, who's shooting whom and where are the bazookas and what else we have to get our arms around.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair statement. We're familiar with you over the course of time through a number of different roles. You've served at some very important roles in the criminal justice system. But I think right out of the gates for our listeners, Wayne being a small town Mohawk guy coming in, and he was over in the western part of the state and did a lot at that state level for a long time. And now, there's a new face in a new place, but the bloodlines are still pretty thick. And for some of us, some of our community members out here that may not know, completely about Drew, take some time and maybe just tell them about your history, maybe a little bit, and who you are and upbringing and such.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a fourth generation North Dakotan. Probably my wife and I are raising the fifth generation with our little monsters. They're not so little anymore. We've got a couple of kids in college and an eighth grader over in Bismarck there at Shiloh Christian. And like I said, I was born in Bismarck, but grew up in Fargo. We moved to Fargo when I was about 4 or 5, and I've got an older brother and a younger sister. Went all through the public school system there, and then on to the University of North Dakota. Graduated in 1988, and then I went to law school. And following law school, excuse me, I worked for a 1-year judicial clerkship. And then after that, I had this strong desire. I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor, and I really, and North Dakota, as I said, I'm 4th generation, and this was always and is always going to be home. But I really wanted the experience of prosecuting in a major metropolitan area, and so, that's a longer story. But somehow I figured out I got a job in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, one of America's most violent cities, and one of its largest prosecutor's office. There were 300 assistant district attorneys there. And I served in that capacity for over 5 years, and it was an incredible experience. I was immersed in like I said, one of America's most violent cities, and working with the men and women in uniform across that city. It was a privilege, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot in those years. It was a tremendous set of experiences.
Gotcha. What was your high school alma mater?
Fargo South.
Fargo South.
Yep, I'm a Fargo South Bruin.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And your undergrad at UND. What did you get your undergrad in?
Economics. I majored in economics with a minor in philosophy, which is why I seem so philosophical when I talk about things. Yeah.
How did your upbringing take you down those paths?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have amazing folks. My parents really preached a couple of simple things to us. Find what it's simple, and we all hear this, but it's a cliche and true. Find what you love. Find your path. Find something that's interesting to you on your talents and what you want to go after, and pursue it. And they did that with my brother and sister and me. We all ended up in totally different venues as a result, because you really just pursued the things that mattered to you. And in my case, I loved history. I loved reading about political leaders and historical events. And
where did that come from?
Really, more than anything, I think that came from watching my folks devour the newspaper every day, newscasts. And my mom would tell stories about how she would be reading the paper late at night, and I would, just a little kid come in and nestle under the arm, and I'd get my face into the newspaper and start reading it. And that started off, it was and remains a lifelong love of understanding community, societal events, and both in their historical context and where things likely to go. My parents were both. My dad was he passed away a few years ago now. He was a mechanical engineer, a graduate of the University of North Dakota, who founded an industrial contracting company in Fargo, Wrigley Mechanical, that my family and I we still own, and we're still incredibly proud of that company. My older brother Blake, my brother-in-law Keith, and their crew there just do tremendous work. We're very proud of that company. And my dad was very civically involved, very involved in the shrine and the Masons, and involved in Boy Scouts and other community events. My mom was a volunteer in all sorts of things through church, and you name it. And so we really saw that they were community involved people. And all three, my brother and sister and I, all kind of got that bug to want to do things that recognize you also want to impact your community. So, excuse me, my little sister, I mentioned my brother, my little sister, we're in our 50s now. I still call her my little sister.
Yeah, right.
She's a principal in the Fargo public school system, and just has always done a tremendous job. And we all love hearing great stories from families about how well Tanya does there. And again, very community minded. So that's really where that came from. And in my case, I'm the first lawyer in the family. I knew, you could tell I was the first lawyer in the family. When I was United States Attorney the first time, and I had the privilege of twice serving as U.S. Attorney in here in North Dakota. The first time we had a case, and some years later I got sued. $5 million. Got sued by a defendant for $5 million. It was on the front page of the newspaper, huge font, Wrigley sued for $5 million. My mom called, she's very upset. She knows I don't have $5 million. And she said, "Oh my gosh, Drew, what's going on?" And I laughed. I said, "Mom, A, it's a farce. It was a perfectly good investigation and everything was totally fine. B, we're immune from suits because these things are done just to harass people." And she said, "Well, but Drew, there must be something to it. A lawyer would never file something like that if there weren't something to it. I laughed. I said, spoken like the mother of someone with one lawyer in the family. I said, Mom, I guarantee you something. A couple things. One, that suit's going to be thrown out, and it's going to be thrown out quick. And number two, it ain't going to be on page 1. And it wasn't. It was way back on page like 17, a little thing on the side, lawsuit thrown out. Wrigley continues his work.
Did you serve in high school or through UND, student body, stuff like that?
No.
Student senate or anything?
No, I wasn't involved in student government. I went, when I got to law school, I got involved in the Student Bar Association and did some of that work. But no, I wasn't involved I was involved in student organizations. I was a 3-sport athlete. Notice I didn't say standout athlete, but I ran cross country, played hockey, and ran track.
Okay.
And then at the university, I was really a remarkable table tennis player, pool player. I was pretty good at pool, and all the other intramurals. And so,
What'd you run in track?
The mile and the 2 mile.
You have the fastest time for you? What's your PR?
Fastest? My PR in the mile was 4:45, I think.
Really?
I placed in a lot of meets, but I didn't win anything. I placed a lot. I held my own. My wife and I've got 3 kiddos, and our middle kiddo, Patrick, was quite a cross country and track runner. And Quinn too, our oldest, she also, but she swam for because they went to Shiloh. She had to swim for Class A school, so she swam for Century and did a great job. And they were in a couple state championships. And then Patrick was he won a lot of races. I would always tell him I never got to see the view from there where no one was in front of me. But
would you rather run a mile or the 5K?
As time went by, I liked longer things. As in my older age, I got talked into running marathons. I ran 4 Fargo marathons, and
good for you.
I was pretty good at settling into a pace and being able to hold on to that. So I ran some decent marathons.
Gives you some time to get in your own head and settle there.
I like that. Are you a runner?
Yeah, I would tell you 5K. I'm not built. I'm the Clydesdale division.
Yeah. See, I'm not hindered by all your muscle. I don't have that. I'm built like I can go run the 5K. Yeah, I'm built like a gazelle. Exactly. That's a nice way of saying that I'm lanky, but okay.
Yeah, my fastest mile was 5:25. So it's not a sub 5 minute like that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, 5:25 is a good mile. That's what my 8th grade daughter runs.
So
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, I believe that though. I've seen some of those 7th and 8th graders. They can fly like the wind.
Yeah, she's coming along. She's only in 8th grade, but she's running with the varsity this weekend over in Fargo at a meet. So that's fun. I mean, those are great things for young people to be involved in. And I, like I said, I was a middle of the road athlete in high school. But boy, if you've got good coaches and other people that are around, that influences you for life. Those are tremendous experiences. That's just one of the great things about living in North Dakota. And we really preach that to our kids. And all 3 of them have been involved in all sorts of athletics and other things through their school. You get that one shot as you come through that program, and you get the influence of other adults who are helping, pull in the right direction. And so they've been great experiences. Whether a person goes on to run or play a sport in college, I think is almost irrelevant. It is irrelevant. It's that experience. So
you talk about coaches. A lot of times coaches are really big mentors for people. Who was your biggest mentor growing up?
Oh, easy. Other than my folks, that's Ghislaine Orvik was my track and cross country coach, and a remarkable guy. And I tell a lot of stories about him. In 9th grade, I went out, and he'd been kind of watching me coming through junior high, and I was a decent runner, so he was always encouraging me, and he couldn't wait for me to get to Fargo South. I was going to run, and I went out my freshman year, and a couple weeks into high school, and I'm thinking, my high school takes a lot more studying, and I wanted, being a student was important to me too, and I felt all this enormous pressure. We all remember the enormous pressure of being in 9th grade, right? So I went to him. I said, I'm not going to be able to run cross country. I remember he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're not going to run cross country?" Drew, I don't even want to say that. I don't even like to think this, let alone say it. But once a quitter, always a quitter. Well, I did in fact quit. I quit cross country that year, and it burned in my stomach all winter long. I played hockey, had a pretty good hockey season, and it just kept burning. I'm like, who does that guy think he is? Once a quitter, always a quitter. And I couldn't get it out of my mind, because there was deep down I knew that there was something to that. And my folks, they were definitely hinting along the same lines. Like, you got to rethink things in life if you're stepping back from them just because you think, wow, it's too hard right now, or whatever it was. And I went out for track, and people look back on that and they say, yeah, that was just ninth grade. It was just ninth grade, but it was a formative experience in my life. And I went out for track and I ran like a crazy person because I was so anxious to get back out there and prove myself to this guy who I'd looked up to all these years and who looked at me and called me a quitter, and I was always going to be a quitter. And it's it's something I look back and I think I haven't quit on anything since. I don't think I've quit on a single thing important since, and that was important. And he became, he was a great coach. I worked hard at that, and I was proud to be the captain of the cross country team my senior year. And I left there with a set of experiences and understanding about some things that I value to this day. And like, you can tell, still it still touches me.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, and he remains a great friend. All through life, we have highs and lows, every one of us. And Glenn Orvik he's on my phone when there are highs and when there are lows. And most recently, again, when the word came out that I'd been appointed Attorney General, one of the first texts was Glenn Orvik.
Yeah.
Great man. And, a lot of people have stories like that about him and other teachers and coaches that they have in their lives. They impact. He invited me one year when I was Lieutenant Governor to speak to a national coaching organization. They were in from all over the country. And it was such a privilege to go through and talk about some different things. But most importantly, I wanted to tell them that I know that they don't get enough thank you letters, and people don't write back and say, oh, my third grade teacher or my eighth grade coach or whatever it might be. But I said, never forget that we all sit around and we talk about you for the rest of our lives. When we get together with our friends from high school or teams that we were on or some teacher or professor, people talk about you, and we don't pick up a pen often enough and send somebody a note. But I just don't ever want anybody in those lines of work and professions ever feel like it's just because you don't hear from everybody. Never forget how much you mean to us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great highlight from a foundational base for you. You look back in time.
Huge.
The important people that you've had. You think of philosophy, economy, these things that you went and explored in the university systems.
Yeah.
And there's a whole field in front of you, and you're looking at that law school and such. And so then you drop the grenade and you say, prosecutor.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
How does that come? How does that filter its way through for you? You want to do this, and that's the field. I mean, most attorneys. I got some friends that are attorneys. They'll tell you that's not where the money's at.
No,
right?
they make a lot more money doing something else. But
right. Yes.
I lucked into being haphazard about my law career because I didn't know what I was going to do. After I went out to D.C., I was in law school in Washington, D.C., but I was going to come home for the summer for sure. I mean, this is where you want to be. You don't want to be in Washington, D.C. for the summers. Came back, and I had no plan between my first and second year. And my family was acquainted with Judge Rodney Webb, who was a federal judge and been a former U.S. attorney. And I walked in there one day, and I'm not kidding you, I had short pants on and a T-shirt. I just happened to wander into the federal courthouse. I was back for about a week, and I thought, well, I'll stop by there and see if I could say hello. I'd met him once. My parents knew him through the Shrine. I mentioned that. I walked in and I asked the nice lady in the clerk's office there, I said, my name is Drew Wrigley. Could I talk to Judge Webb? I'm not kidding. I'm standing there shorts. And she said, well, I'll go back. And she walked back and she came back out and she said, Judge Webb will see you tomorrow. And she looked down and she said, and wear pants. And I said, all right, I'll wear pants. So I came back the next day and knowing me, probably khakis and a golf shirt. And I came back, and anyway, he said, yeah, well, come on in for the summer. You can be an intern here, and set me up at a little desk, and I got to work on different opinions and do some writing and really just observe. And I had no experience about understanding what I was going to do, what kind of law was I interested in. But I'll tell you what, I started watching courtroom stuff, watching what was happening, watching the assistant U.S. attorneys coming in, cases they were trying or hearings, different stuff. And the officers and agents are getting up there and testifying, and they're going through all this. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, that probably took a lot of preparation. You can kind of have a sense of like everything that had gone into that moment to get ready for that. And there's something about it. I got the bug right then and there. I sort of got a sense like this could be something I'm really interested in. I came back the second summer between second and third year in law school. I worked for the United States Attorney's Office, summer intern, and that was it. It was over. I was like, from that point on, that's all. I didn't apply for any jobs that were not prosecutor jobs. And I felt really blessed to get an opportunity in Philadelphia. And
now there's a connection to law enforcement that kind of weaves itself into your life here, right?
Yeah, in Philly.
Yeah, in Philly.
Yeah. And so I go to Philadelphia. I don't know a soul. I do not know a single person my first night when I knew the name of my boss, the DA, Lynn Abraham at the time, but I didn't know anybody. I wasn't like going someplace that I had any familiarity with. And I still say, there's times I wonder, how did lightning strike? And I ended up getting that job, but I did. And I went to work there, and they have a 3-year commitment. You know, they want a 3-year commitment. They do a lot of training with you, and they know that you're going to gain a lot of experience, and they don't want you leaving after a year or two. Well, I mean, I got to year 3, and it was awesome. I was loving it. I was in the major trials unit. Things were going well. I worked nonstop. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So what else are you going to do? I worked all the time, and I just loved it. Well, there was this woman in the office who was she worked as she had gotten a graduate degree. She'd finished her master's degree, and she was contemplating going to law school. And we met in the office there, and she was working as a clerk in one of the divisions. And I don't know, she begged me a few times, and I decided I'd go out to. I basically.
Is she going to tell that same story?
Yeah, I think she'd tell roughly the same story. And so we ended up going out to dinner, and then, as always happens when you go out to dinner, 6 months later we got engaged. And a year after that, we got married. So and Kathleen, we got married, and then we moved to North Dakota 4 months later. Kathleen, her comes from a long line of law enforcement in her family. She's got cousins, and her brother was a police officer who was killed in the line of duty. He was a Philadelphia police officer. He was 21 years old. He was a rookie, and patrolling one of the worst neighborhoods in one of America's toughest cities. And there was a defendant who had been out. He had just served a long felony sentence. I believe it was for burglary, and had 20 years of back time, but he was out. And
remember how long he was out for?
Not very long. They were talking about a short period of time, a year, and they had some what's called bail reform going on in that city, and you could sign your own bail. He got arrested on a couple of more things. He got to sign his own bail. Like, he didn't have to put up any money. Mm-hmm. He got out, so he's out. He's a scofflaw. He's not going in for his court hearings. He's in the wind, and he's driving a stolen car that night. And Kathleen's brother, Officer Danny Boyle, saw the plate, ran the plate, gave chase, and car finally stopped, crashed into a gas station, as I recall, and then he jumped out of the vehicle and unloaded.
Shots fired.
He unloaded before Danny was even able to get his service weapon, out to defend himself. So. He died a couple of days later, and that was before. That was I was a third year in law school down in D.C., but it was a really highly publicized case. Like, you heard about that this case had happened because there was a big manhunt and a lot of things that had happened, and they caught him 2 or 3 days later, and then it went on. So I was familiar with the case, but then all these years later, and then Kathleen and I met, and then her father also is a police officer. He's retired now, 34-year. Officer and detective in the Philadelphia Police Department. She's got cousins who are in law enforcement, uncles, and great family tradition. Was
Danny's was he apprehended, or was there? How did that?
He was apprehended. I think it was 3 days later. It was he was like running down as the story goes, he was running down the rooftops like you'd see in a movie down the row homes, and they were chasing him, and he fell through like a skylight into one of the row homes. Went inside there and. Apparently took something flammable. I think it might have been fingernail polish remover or something. And there were people in the unit, the apartment unit that he fell into, some kids, and they were cowering in a closet of some kind. They're hiding in there, and he's spreading this stuff all over the place and starts it on fire. Starts the place on fire. Law enforcement gets in there and does what law enforcement does, right? They save his life and everybody else in there and put out the fire. He was burned pretty extensively. There was no loss of life as a result of this. Then they went to trial on the case a year later, and he was convicted of murdering Kathleen's brother and got the death penalty, actually also, which went on for years and years. And there were appeals and everything else. And here some years back, about the 20-year mark after the conviction and the death sentence, the death sentence itself was reversed. And he continues to serve life without the possibility of parole in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yeah, we appreciate you sharing that here on this. This is a great platform for that. I know our listeners, they always enjoy, appreciate those kinds of stories. So, that's early on in your career.
Yeah, it's early on in my career. So then we moved back to, Kathleen and I moved back to North Dakota in 98, moved to Bismarck. And I spent a short time with one of the state agencies, but then shortly after that, I was named the executive director of the Republican Party, which made sense. I'd never been to an organized political meeting in my life, so of course, naturally, I would be the executive director. So I didn't bring a lot of background and experience to it. A host of experiences that applied, though. I had been working tirelessly in my years as an assistant district attorney, working on a skill set that it wasn't a misfit for politics, really. I mean, about just coming up with a sense of vision about where you want to go, gathering people to work on behalf of the effort. And we worked hard through that cycle, that 2000 cycle. I was honored to be working with all the people running for office. That was Wayne Stenehjem's first year running for Attorney General. And we were really happy to see him pull out that victory. And It was a great one. John Hoeven, his victory over Heidi Heitkamp in the governor's race, which nobody saw coming. I remember all through that campaign. I mean, we're talking August and September. People are still saying to me, he's really good. And I'm probably not going to win this time, but the next time, he's going to. I'm like, what's wrong with you people? This is not the attitude that we need. Sure. We got to be a little more bullish about this. And Hoeven showed himself to be what he is. He's a tenacious, highly competitive person. Which, if he were sitting here, he's not exactly always colorful, right? But I love John. He's a close personal friend and professional ally too, and I love him a lot. But I tease him about that. He's not always colorful, but he's a highly competitive guy, great athlete. He was a multi-sport athlete up at Minot Ryan going through, and you just have to take my word for it. He was a quarterback of the football team, point guard on the basketball team, the whole deal. I think he ran track too. I've gone running with him though, so probably not that fast at track. But anyway, so he ran a heck of a race, and we had a whole host of people, and went well. And I'll tell you what, I've been back in the state a year and a half, I guess, when the election's over and George W. Bush is elected president of the United States. And in fact, it was the first day Hoeven was sworn in as governor, and he had asked me to join his staff, and I was on the staff. Got down to the end of the day, and everybody kind of taken off, and I wandered into the office, and I sat down, and I said, I just got to let you know something. He's like, oh, what's that? And I said, I'm throwing my hat in the ring to be U.S. Attorney. I still remember he looked up at me. He'd been writing some stuff. Drewski, it's our first day. He said, was it that bad? I said, no, I just didn't know when to tell you. And he goes, yeah, well, perfect timing. He said, you're serious? You're gonna leave me? I said, well, I don't know. I got to try to get the job. But
how did that present itself to you?
Well, it obviously with my background, I was interested in it, and just some people had suggested that I give that a thought, and then the dust settled. I'm a very focused person. When you're in combat, you got to be on it. And so I was thinking about nothing but the elections, and we were working hard at that. But then the dust settled, and you knew that there were going to be these opportunities. And I remember, making that decision over the weeks after the election, and one thing led to another. As it turns out, I got appointed and then confirmed. It was interesting, though. We had 2 Democrat senators at the time, and that's kind of the way these things go. Your U.S. senators are going to play an enormously important role in that. And so I had to meet with them about the topic, and I remember sitting down with then Senator Conrad, and he looked at me and he said, all I know about you is that you've been the top political operative for the Republican Party. And he goes, I don't know anything about you. And he said that twice, and I'm kind of smiling. He said, what's funny about that? I said, well, you're referring to me as the top political operative, and I know what I did every day, like got screamed at on the phone and people complaining about what we were doing or not doing at the party. And I said, but if top political operative sounds a lot better. And he kind of chuckled. And I said, he said, what else have you done? And I started telling him about my time as U.S. attorney, or as an assistant DA. And I said, it was a big office, but I worked hard and I did everything I could to try to distinguish myself through my work. It's a Democrat town, and we had a Democrat DA, and whatever Lynn Abraham says about me, I'm stuck with it. And he said, well, I'm going to give her a call.
What's your mom and your dad saying at this point here? Are they trying to rattle your can, say, get back to Wrigley Mechanical here, listen, do some stuff here, like you need to wake up, Drew? Or
no, I had never distinguished myself with my work at Wrigley Mechanical. Yeah. I worked there in the summers once in a while, and my dad, his thing was I'd come back between years in college, and and he'd be sending me out to job sites and different stuff, and he's like, well, what do you think you should get paid this summer? I said, I would give him my idea, and he would cut me off every time. He's like, minimum wage. I'm like, minimum wage? And he's like, what are you paying for rent this summer, Drew? Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, gotcha.
So anyway, but so Kent Conrad said, I'm going to call Lynn Abraham. And he must have. He called me back 2 weeks later, and he's chuckling. He said, Drew, I'm going to support you to be U.S. Attorney. I mean, that's how quick that went. Those were the days. Things are different these days, but he's like, I'm going to support you to be U.S. Attorney. He said, I spoke to Lynn Abraham. He said, quite a lady. I said, she's amazing.
What was the total time in that?
About 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks.
Yeah, he said, I'm going to support you. And she said, in fact, he said, Lynn tells me that I got to support you to be U.S. Attorney. And if you want to be a federal judge someday, I got to support you to be a federal judge, Drew. In fact, she told me no matter what Drew Wrigley wants to do, I got to support him. Because she said you're going to be president of the United States someday. Mm-hmm. And he said, Drew, I'm not going to be on the wrong side of the president of the United States.
Oh, bless Lynn's soul.
Yeah. Right? So we both laughed. We had a good laugh. And he was. And he got me lined up to meet with Senator Dorgan, which I did. And he supported the nomination. And it went through in due course. And we all got confirmed at roughly the same time. And I had just had the privilege of working with federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement in that work and lead that office for 8 years. And it was an incredible privilege to do so. And I appreciated the day that I stepped down when President Obama had taken office, and I stayed on for almost a year there because I had personally tried the Rodriguez case and the death penalty case, and we got the death sentence, and then we were going to argue it to the 8th Circuit, and that happened into the Obama administration. They allowed me to stay so that I could personally argue it there as well, and I did. And we got the decision in September, and I stepped down. And Senator Conrad and Senator Dorgan both called separately. I appreciated it very much, and both complimented the work, but also most memorably, pointed out that they said what they characterized as there had never been a hint of politics in the work that we had done, and I'm proud of that, and it was also my pledge to them going in. This is not political work. It's a political appointment, but the work is, as I don't have to tell anybody here, that's sacred work. It's a responsibility on behalf of the community, and I was proud to have served in that capacity. It was heartbreaking to leave the U.S. Attorney's Office. I loved that work and had no reason to believe I'd ever have an opportunity to go back to it. But as they say, we make plans and God laughs sometimes because, I made my way. I went into the private sector for a while, and then Governor Hoeven gets elected senator, and then Lieutenant Governor Dalrymple becomes governor, and asked if I would serve with him as his lieutenant governor, and then we sought and won a term in 2012. Served that term, didn't run for re-election in 2016. And shortly after that, I threw my hat in the ring to be U.S. Attorney again, and was privileged that President Trump nominated me, and I was eventually confirmed. Although the Senate path was not quite the same the second time around, those things happen, and for whatever reason, I was one senator short of full support for a while, but we got there, and that's life. People say, well, what about all that? Same thing. It's God's timing. I just firmly believe that in life. There's a reason for it. There's a reason why that, they drug it out. Knock yourself out. Because again, I wasn't going to quit. I think that was the idea. That thing, well, if we drag it out, maybe I'll quit. I didn't quit. I appreciated Senator Hoeven was an absolutely stalwart every step of the way. He was amazing. And when Senator Kramer was eventually elected, everything was taken care of as far as lining up the support, and we got into office. And I had the opportunity to serve and was proud to do so, and I think we accomplished a lot. I
want to bounce you back and talk a little bit, because I know our listeners are, again, liking this kind of topic on the Rodriguez case.
Yeah.
Talked about back there. The impacts of that as that went through, and there's some things I think you could add that they'll...
Yeah. Well, thanks. That case, when I'd been in the office several years, and I've already described my background as a prosecutor, and the Dru Sjodin went missing, and you had no one had any idea at first whether she was missing or who knew. But within days, it was clear that it had been an abduction. Right. And if there's a kidnapping that crosses state lines, there's federal jurisdiction. And as the evidence developed in that case, it became increasingly clear that Drew was not coming back, that she was, in fact, had been abducted and was not going to be coming back. And then also some circumstantial evidence that she had, in fact, crossed over into Minnesota, either alive or deceased. And under the federal kidnapping statute, there's jurisdiction either way, whether it's a body being transported across state line or a living person. And so people are familiar with the facts. I won't go through them and all of that, except to say that you have a already 3 times convicted sex offender who abducts Drew at knife point from the mall parking lot in Grand Forks and transported her. We believe they went south out of Grand Forks and then eventually over the bridge and into Minnesota. And in that time frame, Drew is at some point, she's beaten and her hands were bound behind her back. Her sweater was pulled up and put over her head to further restrain her. She was stripped from the waist down. And, I'll leave it at that.
Right.
Because it wasn't a rape case that we proved, but the obvious circumstances were pretty obvious what was going on. And as I said many years later to the jury when I was closing in that case, all the evidence, everything else, and Drew fought. I mean, she fought. There was blood all over that car, his and hers. Her body was bruised, and she had defensive injuries. And she did everything she possibly could, but in the end, he, like I said, got her hands tied behind her back, and she was eventually marched into a ditch outside of Crookston, and she was killed.
Well, and her name has continued to live on in the profession through our offender registry and those sorts of conversations about those policies and such in a very, hope the family understand in a great way, as far as the things that, as time has went on, positively impacted that kind of crime and those things. And so,
well, I just, as fortune would have it, on the way out here from Bismarck this morning, spoke with Drew's mom, Linda Walker, in an not unrelated to the case, but I didn't anticipate that. I didn't know we were going to even be discussing it today. But
sure.
We remain close all these years later. And her mom, during the trial, there was a break in the trial of a couple of days, and her mom and her dad and her stepfather were all able to travel to Washington, D.C. to be in the Rose Garden when George W. Bush signed the Dru Sjodin sex offender registry into federal law. And so we got through that trial. It's quite a thing. People say, well, has that guy been executed yet? Because it's remarkable to them, right? We get through the guilt phase, found him guilty, they found him eligible, and then they find for death. The jury does. And then they ask for a new trial, and Judge Erickson doesn't give them a new trial because he was presiding over the whole trial, and he handpicked these 2 lawyers, the defense lawyers, as happens, and he oversaw the selection of all the national experts, the best people in the country, working on behalf of the defense. And Judge Erickson signing off every step of the way, so of course he doesn't grant them a new trial when it's all over. And then it goes to the 8th Circuit, and I argue it to the 8th Circuit, and we prevail in the 8th Circuit, and then they ask to have the whole 8th Circuit see it. And the rest of the 8th Circuit's like, there's nothing else to see here. This thing's just fine. It goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, 9-0, cert denied, nothing to see here on direct appeal, complaining about my closing arguments, complaining about our evidence, complaining about the law enforcement tactics, everything. All of it rejected. No, direct appeal, case stands, death sentence stands. Rodriguez is on death row in Terre Haute. He was death row inmate number 50 in the federal system. There aren't many. The Justice Department gets the death penalty about one time out of 5 nationally. You got to have a unanimous verdict out of that for death, and so it's uncommon. So there he sat. And then it started. Then the next line of appeal. Then they start attacking their own defense attorneys. Then they get in, it's called the 2255. They've done the direct appeal. The government stinks. Now we're into my defense stinks. And don't forget, you've got Bob Hoy, who's the best defense lawyer I have ever tried a case against in all my years in Philly and here. He's one of his lawyers. And a guy by the name of Richard Ney, national defense expert on death penalty stuff, 25 years, had never lost a federal death verdict. We didn't like one another, but I mean, Bob and I get along very cordially, but Richard and I, it was oil and water. But I'll tell you what, an enormous respect for his talent. It was obvious, and his experience. So now they're attacking that, and Judge Erickson allows this to go on for 10 years. This whole time, I've gone from there, the office at that point. For 10 years, I'm hearing about all these things they're doing all over the country. No end to it. He's doing depositions all over the United States of America, all over the place, and he's letting it go on and on and on and on. 10 years. Enormous cost, gets to the end. I'm back being U.S. Attorney again, and it comes back, and it gets back to Ralph Erickson's desk again. He's since been put up to the 8th Circuit, but he still has this case that he's looking at over the whole thing, and it came out here last year. He concludes that Rodriguez had ineffective assistance of counsel. He reverses the death verdict because the 2 lawyers that he handpicked and that he personally oversaw all of their work and knew their talent level, watched them during the trial, oversaw and signed off on all their experts. All these years later, the only way that's left to let this thing turn into a life sentence instead of death is to sign them. How about ineffective assistance of counsel?
You think of steel sharpening steel, and as at moments of frustration, I'm sure, as this criminal justice system has played itself out. And we talk a little bit on some of the prior stuff, people getting them to understand, how this thing works. And we understand it and get frustrated from time to time as well. And so, but you look at those experiences and in dealing with some of those sorts of characters and personalities. Has that been something that's helped you out along the way with, in the context, your experience or professionalism, things like that?
Well, I like any person, if you're really paying attention and you want to dissect, like, how do you get to this point in your life, or how do you get to that? You're a combination of, the mountaintop experiences and the valleys, all of it, and the difficult personalities and the people that you think to yourself, gosh, he or she is someone I really want to emulate, or that they've got a professional skill set or a way that I want to, try to follow. So it's a combination of all those things, and I've tried to keep in my life the same, part of my prayers every day. Pretty simple. We'll see. Because you know what? Some days you're on the front page of the paper and you're holding the championship belt, and that's not your life. That's a part of your life. And some days, you're in a valley. Things are pretty rough, and you got to say the same thing. We'll see, because that's not your life either. It's all of it. It's a big combination of all of it, and you draw on those experiences and people, and there are setbacks and there are disappointments, and some of them are profound. And there's nothing you can do. You can do everything you can do to avoid that situation, or to make it go a different way. Whether it's a case or an investigation, or you're trying to become the next level of management in your company, or whatever it might be. And there are setbacks, and or somebody gets in your politics is rough that way. Somebody gets in your way and they're thwarting what you're trying to accomplish. You can't figure out why, and they look you right in the eye and they tell you they're not doing it, and they're doing it, and you know that they are. And you're reminded that, gosh, it's not only 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds. It's older, taller people also will look you right in the eye and say, "No, I'm not blocking your nomination. I'm not doing any of that stuff." Like, really? It's weird, because I know that the opposite is true. So those things happen, and I think the quest is to not become cynical. And it goes back to as simple as the lesson we talked about with Ghislaine Orvik: don't quit. Just don't quit. Never quit. It doesn't mean you never recalibrate and judge, like, okay, this quest is over and I'm going to do a different thing. That's different from quitting. Don't quit. Simple as that. If you've got an objective and it remains true and it remains something that you want to pursue, do not quit. And people say, that's a great cliche. No, it's a way of life too. And I mentioned I haven't quit since 9th grade cross country. And I'm almost glad that I did, because that was a searing experience for me. You began the conversation talking about, kind of this being dropped into this war zone, kind of, use some terminology. They're having fun with it, And so I know we got a lot of people that are going to be watching and listening, looking at, like, okay, the current state of affairs, with the AG's office sorting through the mourning and this transfer and transition on a big year at that. Again, on a big election year for a lot of different people. So for, just in the position for how the state of affairs for the AG's office, relevant to our community out here to the west, things that you guys are looking at, focusing on, tackling. Working awfully hard on a variety of matters, and a lot of them pushing back against the encroachment of the federal government. A federal government that has a voracious appetite for reaching out across the United States and over-regulating and doing things in a one-size-fits-all manner that completely ignores that Rhode Island is not Michigan, is not Wyoming, is not California, is not North Dakota. And it becomes, it's not just it can't be left to just be a political talking point. One of my objectives in office, in whatever time the voters give me in this office, is to help start to form a national consensus among Republican and Democrat-leaning states to recognize what we lose when the federal government comes out to overregulate our lands, our utilization of our resources, and the infrastructure that we utilize to have broader statewide, region-wide, and nationwide utilization of our resources. Good example. I was on the phone the other day for about 45 minutes with the Assistant Secretary of the Army. They're undergoing a process, part of a repetitive, years-long process on the DAPL pipeline.
Sure.
Okay, so you got a pipeline that was built as state-of-the-art pipeline to transmit oil out of the number 2, now we're number 3, that'll go back and forth, but we're a very important energy-producing state. We're producing 1 million plus barrels of oil a day, and half of it's going out through that pipeline. It is the most efficient, safe, environmentally sound way to transmit that life-sustaining, essential ingredient for modern life. And yet we're sitting back and we're not looking at the assembled record across all these years. The safety record is phenomenal. And it was cited through a public process, all the things that people are aware of. And yet our public infrastructure is going to depend on the outcome of a presidential election. Like every 4 years, everything changes. Now that pipeline, oh, no, got to go back in there and take another look at the pipeline. The only look that they should have at that pipeline is the constant, and they do, constant safety checks to make sure we're not having leaks or that we don't have, it's not weakening the infrastructure and that we're continuing to protect our communities. Who cares about our community out here, our water, our land, our human life more than the people of North Dakota? Nobody. That's who. Certainly not bureaucrats off in Washington, D.C. So we're fighting that in the courts. And I spent time on the phone with the Assistant Secretary of the Army the other day. They're undergoing a process right now that here we are. We don't have any choice. And the threat being that, yep, if we get to the end of that and you guys don't satisfy, we're going to shut down the pipeline. Well, you're going to shut down the pipeline. We're moving 500,000 barrels of oil a day, and they're trying to ramp it up to where they're going to be moving 750,000 barrels of oil a day out of North Dakota and into the national and international economy at a time where we're being held hostage in part by a war-mongering nation that's invaded its neighbor. Energy prices are spiraling. Our economy is stumbling. Not just energy prices, all of our prices are going up. The American family is losing ground every day because of inflation, making the same amount of money, and the inflation's robbing you of that. And we're having a serious conversation about a many years old pipeline that is state-of-the-art, has a great safety record, and there were all sorts of public hearings, and it was done in compliance with the law. That, to me, is not a we cannot continue as a serious nation and a serious economy long if that's what we're going to do every couple of years. We're going to politically go back and get into another skirmish about these things. That's a no-brainer. That's one example. That's something we're doing, that type of thing. And water issues and land use and the grasslands and all of this stuff, pushing back to say, we will solve these problems here in North Dakota. Leave us be. We have a stewardship responsibility for our land. We take it seriously. The stakeholders are here, and we're pretty good at hearing them out. So we're fighting those battles. I've done a lot of work in the last 6 weeks, work with the BCI, tremendous organization, the men and women of the BCI, the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, who I oversee. Lonnie Gabrowska is the very capable leader there, and they got tremendous people. We've had a number of investigations already, a couple that I've launched and that we're moving on, and I'm really proud of their work, and I'm incredibly honored to be in the position I am to help guide their efforts. They've been tremendous, and like I say, we've got work going on there and a host of different activities. So we're working on the civil front, the criminal front. You know what? February 28th, I'd been in office a few weeks. On February 28th last year, I stepped down as the United States Attorney for North Dakota. And I remember thinking, what's next? I mean, it happened more rapidly than we thought. We thought I might be able to stick around for a while, and then the new administration let all the U.S. attorneys know that we had to vacate office on February 28th. Well, 1 year later, and there was a lot of wonder in that time period, not knowing exactly what I was going to do next, and we all go through that. Everybody does that in life. You examine, well, then professionally, now what am I going to do kind of thing. Flash forward 1 year, February 28th, 2022, I am walking into the Supreme Court of the United States as the Attorney General of North Dakota to sit at council table in a matter of the North Dakota versus the EPA on another regulatory oversight issue involving our good friends in coal country, and against the EPA, again, overreaching and trying to overregulate our economy. I sat there at council table. Don't worry, North Dakota, I didn't argue that 3 weeks after taking office. We had outside counsel making those arguments on behalf of our state, just like Virginia had the same for them. But we'll see what the decision is in that coming up in the spring. So I can go on and on. We've been very busy, and also the critically important work of getting to know the people that I'm working with and that I have the privilege of leading, and our division directors and the people throughout the Attorney General's office. I felt very heartened by their welcome and their openness to maybe a different approach. Any two human beings are going to approach things a little bit differently, and I tend to sometimes seem like a person in a hurry because I'm kind of impatient about wanting to move things ahead and continue to make progress, and they've been very gracious about that, and I deeply appreciate it.
Optimistic about this upcoming year with all the, there's these different things our community's dealing with and the state's dealing with.
Yeah.
And just it pairs up with some of the stuff, kind of the messaging you just had there, but optimistic for the citizens in North Dakota, Western North Dakota, Dickinson here, and where things are headed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both in the private sector economy, I think that the energy economy is, our drilling and our activities down a little bit right now, but I think we're going to be heading in the right direction in that regard. And, it's just such an important part of our fabric out here. Also, we've had some good precipitation this winter. I'm hoping that our farmers and ranchers are going to have a good start in the spring. And that's always exciting. One of the privileges when I was the lieutenant governor was to go on trade missions around the globe with the growers and producers of our state, finding markets around the planet for what we produce here. And people sometimes forget, and they shouldn't, that we're the number one producer of, I think it's 17 or 20 different commodities, and we're up toward the top in so many others. We're an incredibly powerful and important producer for this nation, and as a result for the globe. So I think we're looking really strong in that regard too. And our job in the AG's office is try to keep the regulators at bay, so they don't come in and encroach where they're not needed, where they're not coming in providing useful service and becoming just an inefficiency in that regard. So I think people out here can feel good about that. We've got some work to do on violent crime in the state. We just do. I think anybody who's spent time across a couple decades in our state will look back and say there's been a change. There's more violent crime. There's no getting around it. I grew up in Fargo. I bet it seems like there were 3 shootings my entire childhood before I left to go up to UND. And there's too much gun violence out there. I'm talking illegal guns in the hands of felons who are robbing other drug dealers or robbing people throughout our communities too often. And war's got to be done. And I'm putting together a legislative package right now as we speak about those types of things, because the public is calling for, and they deserve that response, a more forceful response when it comes to the sentencing and the treatment of violent criminals in our state. Men and women, and I'm not just saying this with you guys, everybody hears me say this no matter where, men and women in uniform in this state, they put their life on the line in a very real way every single day. And their families are worried about them when they go out the door, and they just want to know that they're going to come back at the end of that tour of duty. And when they're out there doing that, and they're getting the bad guys, and they're making an arrest after some guys had 5 armed robberies that week, or they're doing this, and someone's shooting there, this gunfire opens up, or officer-involved shootings have skyrocketed in recent years in this state. Well, officer-involved shootings almost always come after someone pulls a firearm on them, and that's got to stop. I've got charts on these things, and I'm looking at that, and I'm saying right there tells the whole story. The families of the men and women in uniform and the men and women in uniform in the state do not have to tolerate a surge in violence toward them. And I'm not suggesting that we become a lawless state, but the trends are wrong, and we're going to do everything we can to assist men and women in uniform and the state's attorneys around the state to ensure that when they do their job, as they always do, and they do it great, you all do a fantastic job. We're blessed by great professional federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement in North Dakota. Well, then we've got to do our side. We've got to do our side to make sure sentences are appropriate. And I think for too often right now, I have to hear the stories about we lock the guy up. He's a multiple convicted felon. He shot at the cops. He gets locked up, and here he comes back. way too fast. That doesn't serve the public's interest. We're going to do something about that.
You talked about the legislative package coming up, I suppose, in the next biennium. So too soon to tell right now. I'm sure you guys are working on some details and stuff behind the curtains, but that can be expected for the
for sure
in the future.
Yep. A package with regard to some sentencing reform. And too often these days you hear sentencing reform, and what does it mean? It means everybody's getting out of jail. Sentencing reform just means, we're just going to lower the sentences. Yeah, for some things, I guess I would be amenable on completely non-violent types of offenses if we can find alternatives, maybe home confinement, different things like that. Folks can find an ally in Drew Wrigley. But violent criminals, multiple convicted felons, people that are becoming, starting to enhance these trends that I've just been discussing about, I'm going to put everything I can behind the idea that we need to ensure as a community that people are getting locked up as the results of the work of the men and women in uniform, that the results of that are that people are getting appropriately lengthy sentences for violent crimes in the state. Pretty simple, and people say, where are you going to get the space for that? We'll deal with those issues, and part of that, I suppose, comes from truly nonviolent offenders, finding alternatives to sentencing. I like the sound of home confinement in some situations. They and their families can figure out how to feed them. I'm sorry, but it's a time for this, and I can be a nuanced person about a lot of things that we do. I'm not an unevolved thinker or all the other things that you get accused of. But I understand the need to protect society from violent people, and I'm going to do everything I can to enhance the work of the capability, rather, and standing behind the men and women who are out there in uniform, and then also the state's attorneys who are working feverishly to get the convictions and to bring those cases forward. But they don't control the sentences, and so we got to do some more in that regard. And I've been talking with sheriff's offices and police departments across the state, and we're going to have a lot of support for this. And I know dang well the public is in support of this, and I look forward to moving that package forward. But also, just things we can do to enhance the work. The state lab is a big problem here in North Dakota. Not that they're a problem, but our capacity there. And I hear that from sheriff's offices and police departments all across the state also, that we don't, I just found this out recently, we don't test firearms in North Dakota anymore.
Right.
So I met with a group of chiefs of police in my office just this week. And I pledged them, we are going to turn the corner and solve these problems. One chief told me that it cost them $8,000 to test a firearm because they had to find a lab somewhere in the country and send it down to Missouri. $8,000 to test a firearm. Pull the hammer back, boom, gun works. Comes back $8,000. That costs nothing when we're testing it here in North Dakota, or next to nothing. Right. So we're going to address that problem. That's a big deal because there's a backlog, and you're starting to have to make triage decisions about, we won't send them all the evidence, or we're not going to get everything tested in this case. Well, that's not serving the public interest either. So that's another part, going to be part of our program, is figuring out ways to support. We had a great lab, great facility, great professionals there, but we need to get back in the business of testing firearms, running fingerprints. Some of the stuff that has fallen off, just some cuts and some things that have changed. We're gonna rearrange that and get back in the business of having a fully functioning crime lab. And I owe that I met with them last week. I owe that to the people who work there and are doing very, very capable work. They need some more hands on deck, that people can come back in and do that work for the firearms and the other stuff. And I made that promise to them, talking with them in the lab last week, and I make that promise to the people that I know in uniform across the state, that we're gonna be figuring out ways to, again, the fruits of your work, it can get tested here in the state.
Do you see that it may seem so obvious, but does that start with a funding thing, just trying to get money allocated there,
Yep.
and then a focus in that direction?
It's part of it. Yeah, it's part of a funding matter, and then just prioritizing, right, making sure that we've got the right influences on our processes there, and the influences of the BCI and law enforcement. And we got to, I'm aware, we got a couple things we got to change in law. There's always these odd anomalies, but we're going to address those things. I've always done my best to be a problem solver. You identify the problem, there's always a way. There's always a way. And sometimes it's even simple. It's just not easy, right? So, there's political blocks and everything else. And I said, I'm going to be very visible in the legislative process. I'm going to be very visible standing down there because I'm not afraid to take some punches and everything else we got to do. I'm going to stand behind our proposals. I'm going to push every way that I know how to find success in there, and also employ men and women in uniform from across the state where they can support us. We're going to be asking them to come out to Bismarck and help us move this set of proposals forward. And that's going to be, if I'm privileged, if I win this election, then I'm going to be there for that next session.
We've had a bunch of our own citizens here that I know are listening, and I know that Chief Dossinger's had to field some of these calls on instances of frustration and stuff. What you just talked about with turnaround and resources and what we're able to do. And sometimes people's they have a misunderstanding. They expect what you had just said there, an all entailing with the firearms and DNA, quicker. And some of that is to the fault of Hollywood and stuff, right? I mean, it sounds silly, but they have a mistake on it. But we definitely do locally, get a lot of our citizens here. They have high expectations of us, and it's one of the things talked about frequently when we get into criminal investigations and those sorts of things that are important matters from a prosecutorial stance, and how fast the whole wheel moves, because you got to have that kind of stuff to work these cases, and victims, they care about that. Yeah,
they sure do. And it gums up the process and slows it down. And then you start to lose witnesses. All of a sudden, witnesses lose a little interest. And months go by, a year goes by, time keeps going by. And sometimes the bad guys get to the witnesses. Maybe we could just settle this on our own. I'll give you some money. I'll do this, whatever. Or situations change. Justice delayed, it is. Justice denied or watered down in the best instance. And I want to stress that this is not about the men and women who are working in the lab right now. They're working incredibly hard. And I like I said, I know many of them personally. I've been down there a couple times since I became Attorney General, and I'm great facilities. But you got to have more people on board there, and they got to bring back the expertise that was lost here some years back about who can test those firearms. Not just anybody. I mean, I'm very familiar with firearms, but I'm not qualified to go in there and test them. So we're going to have to find the enhancements to help those folks too, because I can promise the public and the men and women in uniform that the folks who are working at the lab, who are there, the resources that are on board, they're working tirelessly. They got a big backlog. They're doing what they can. It's going to take more resources, though, and we can't fool ourselves in the state. You're not meeting the public safety objectives if you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, because the cases don't move through like they need to, and we're going to do something about it.
Great. That's great. I don't want to turn it over to Chief Dossinger for any last thoughts or questions that you have for Drew while we got him here. And I think you probably have a bunch of things that you could say to this, so I'm going to try to grill you like Kelly Armstrong told me I needed to do for you, okay? But just one piece of advice, okay? One piece of advice that Drew wishes he had as a younger man, a younger professional, aspiring, person coming into your field. For our young people listening and anybody out there, just one piece of advice you look back in time you wish you would have had as a young man.
One piece of advice, just one? I mean, this is kind of a speech. One piece of advice that I'd had going along, I would, I personally, I would have benefited from someone telling me the importance of learning to be a better fisherman. Because I say that because fishing it's I don't fish a lot, but I fish a bit, and it's good for a person to spend time in that. And we can go into all the things. If anybody knows anything about fishing, they know what comes of it. It's not just like a fun little pastime. There's something kind of spiritual about fishing. Can be. And you're out there and you're spending time with family and everything else. But it's also intimidating because you don't get the equipment and you don't get all the stuff. So you kind of got to get set up to go fish. So this is a long answer, but I mean, and I say that sort of metaphorically.
Right.
No one will ever accuse me, because they'll be wrong, of not being a person who has pastimes that are fun. And there's nothing more fun than spending time with your family. So we spend we go to the lake every weekend. Okay. All right. So we got our three monsters and my nieces and nephews. Every weekend we're at the lake, and it's great, but we don't fish a lot because of what I'm kind of describing. Yep. We fish a little bit off the dock and stuff. So anyway, people are going to say, guys obsessed with fishing. It's like, no, but once in a while, spend a little more time being a little more deliberate about your pastimes. And I'm a runner. I used to be a runner. Now I'm kind of a swimmer, and I find other times, and I love the outdoors. And we spend an enormous amount of time with our kiddos. It's not that, but it's some things like that. It might be a little more deliberate about some of the pastime things.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing out west. Your constituents out here in the west, outdoors, with the Badlands and the Big Lake. That's a big part of our lives.
We've got our farm, Wrigley Brothers Farm, fourth generation up there. We still own it. We rent it out now, but my dad grew up on that farm. It's northwest of Columbus, northeast of Crosby. In fact, our farm is the Canadian border.
Interesting.
Four generations of saving America from the very warlike Canadian people.
Yeah, that's good.
You're welcome.
Yes,
you're welcome.
Thank you.
But so we go up there. We go up there for deer season every year, and our oldest two kids are old enough to deer hunt. Our youngest isn't, but that's always fun. They're tied 2-2. Each of them have bagged 2 deer so far, and 0 pheasants, but we've got pheasants up there. I shouldn't even tell people that because I don't want people going up there and raiding the pheasants. But no, it's great. We love it. We love it out west, and it's a privilege to be here with all of you today.
Well, Chief Dussing, he's got some teenage boys, and Lieutenant Hale, he's got some young boys, and I got a couple young daughters. So makes me feel really good. I can go home tonight and tell them all these nights I've been putting them to bed fearful of the border up north. Yeah, that they should have rested easy. I take it all back, girls. So
send me a note. Just a simple thanks. That's all we need.
Yeah, exactly. That's the come. So Chief,
I have relatives up there, so I got to be careful. But.
Yeah, Chief, do you got anything for?
You'll certainly in your position, you work directly with state, local, federal law enforcement agencies, and obviously we always have some constants in our profession, such as the war on drugs and behavioral health issues. Yeah. But do you foresee any new challenges coming our direction?
Well, in the area of narcotics, I mentioned my trip to the lab the other day. They're so rapidly changing. They're finding ways around. People don't understand that you have to have there's a scheduling of narcotics, and then there's specific chemical makeup that you have to prohibit a substance. Well, then the bad guys are kind of staying ahead a little bit. They're constantly changing those items chemically. I don't know where they got their PhD or something in chemistry, and went out there, and that's kind of troubling, and that's actually very troubling. And then also, I think there's no question we are going to see a surge in violence in this country in the next not just months but years. We have had, who knows what the number is, people come across the southwest border, and I don't know, the news isn't covering it anymore, but it's happening every day. Yep. And they're flooding across from outside the country. They're coming in illegal, and there's nothing romantic about it. People can try to put a spin on that all that they want, and I get it. It's heart-wrenching. And here comes a mom with 2 little kids. That's part of the picture, but so is the idea that unchecked by authorities at the southwest border are coming in. Too many violent people, criminals, people fleeing their country because they've been let out of prisons and everything else, and that's just fact. There's going to be a surge in violence in this country in the years ahead, in part fueled by that. And we're not going to be immune from that here in North Dakota. You look at, and also I think that we're going to continue to reap I'll put in quotes because I'm being sarcastic, benefit of what's been an erosion of the expectation of conduct toward people in positions of law enforcement authority. And we see that all across the country. You saw it in the riots a couple of summers ago here, and people need to remember that didn't just happen elsewhere. Fargo had a pretty serious riot breakout. My family and I were in Fargo that day, and because of that erosion in what's expected of people, they went out as a peaceful protest, and it began as such, but it didn't take much to get it ginned up pretty rapidly into something that became very dangerous. Broken out store windows, looting, fires getting set, rocks, bottles, Molotov cocktails being thrown at men and women in uniform. There were a couple of dozen, maybe 3 dozen uniformed law enforcement injured, some of them very severely that day. And more mayhem was even attempted out there. That took place. I was U.S. Attorney at the time, by the way, and I made the comment the next day. I said, every provable federal case. We are going to indict every provable federal case. And I met with all the street crimes officers in the Fargo Police Department. I told them flat out, here are the federal offenses. Here are the elements. As you're going to be going through all the video that you got because everybody's wearing masks. as you go through that, it's my pledge. We will prosecute every provable federal case, because it's not one of your options to employ violence when you're out there protesting. And I'm not going to pretend that because you call yourself some group that sounds kind of like I could be sympathetic to that issue, I'm not going to pretend that what you've done is not noxious to society. I don't care who says what about me in that response. I was proud of our response. We stood up and said that. We stood with the men and women in uniform. We stood by our promise to prosecute, and there weren't a bunch of them. They couldn't prove much. I mean, they had identification issues, in part because of breakdown some leaders that wouldn't allow some of that video to be put out. And I'll save that story for a different day. But we indicted those cases, and they didn't get the longest sentence in the history of the world, but it's not much of a sentence, a resume enhancer to be a federal felon. And it's not my fault you jump up on a police vehicle, you kick your foot through that vehicle, you're perpetrating violence towards law enforcement. It's not one of your options. That simple. So in the wake of all of that, there were other protests around in North Dakota in the days after that. And there were no other riots anywhere else in North Dakota. Not suggesting because they're like, oh, Drew Wrigley, stop that. No, but they heard that the political component of things, the prosecutors, the men and women not in uniform, but standing behind the men and women in uniform, were going to stand behind their work. And we were going to prosecute these cases. We were going to take them seriously as they were. And we were going to call it what it was. And we did. And there were no outbreaks of violence. There were many protests. Hey, we're all for it. That's the American way. Petition your government for change. We're the only law enforcement and law and order, maintaining order is the only hope protesters have to be able to get the size of crowds they want to have and to be able to come back out there and do it again. So stand by that work as well. We're proud of that work. And you know what? At the end of the day, I took some criticism from some people for that. Great. That goes with the work. I've always been accessible in my work across 20 years in various public roles here in North Dakota. I'm accessible. I'm transparent about what we're deciding and why, and I'm accountable. I don't try to hide it behind anyone else ever on that. And people can call and complain and do everything else they want to do, and I'll hear them out. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure what else people are going to look for. They can differ with me on some plan we had or something that we did, but it's never going to be a mystery what we're doing and why and who's accountable for it. I am.
Well, Attorney General Stenehjem, he was always he had a strong voice when it came to the public safety, criminal justice end of it.
Yep.
And I know, just coming into the new role from us out here, we're rooting for that for you, down there out of the AG's office. And so, but be it you hear that much or not, from a local 50-man agency, Chief.
No, we appreciate you coming out today. It's nice to have you out in God's country in Western North Dakota and Dickinson. And Dickinson's still a pretty active, vibrant community. We got a number of things going on, a number of city projects right now. But it's great to get you out here.
Thanks.
And hopefully we have time to visit after this. Get a couple hot topics.
I appreciated the invitation. I pulled into town. By the way, I went to a gas station here in town. I pulled in and went inside, and I got a 90-minute drive back, so you got to get some beef jerky, and I got a Slim Jim Tabasco.
You're a corn nuts guy?
Corn nuts? I love corn nuts.
All right,
corn nuts, love them, yeah. And so, but I went with the Tabasco Slim Jim, and the lady, she kind of looked at me, she said, "You look kind of familiar." I said, "Do I?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm the Attorney General." She said, "Are you really?" I said, "Yeah, I am the Attorney General." She goes, "That's great." She started talking. She was very nice. She said, "I got 3 pieces of advice for you." She gave me 3 pieces of advice. I said, I appreciate that. I better get going. I got an interview. She goes, "Slim Jim's on me today." I said, you really don't have to do it. She goes, "No, I want to." She pulls it out of her pocket. That was very, very kind of her. So I've never had a Slim Jim purchased for me in quite that fashion, but
that's the heart of the community here. As far
it was awesome.
We've been so insulated with tons of support, and I'm sure they're going to be very excited to hear what you have to say today as this thing gets going. But we can't let you go without a little of what we like to call speed cuffing. Now you've been around law enforcement. You hear that in the background.
I've never been cuffed, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, you get the gist. You've seen enough videos and stuff. We just try to get this. It's rapid fire questions of sorts. We keep it pretty much a safe territory, PG. Some of it might go G. I don't know. It's like a little child, but anyways. We'll fire them to you as fast as you can, Drew. It's just really about you trying to get the quickest answer out.
I'll try.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any doubts here. So come on. You'll hear Mikey tee up the music for us. And 30 seconds of fun here. All right. Jeep Wrangler or Ford Bronco?
Jeep Wrangler.
Favorite book of all time?
A prayer. No. not a prayer for Owen Meany is second, but Blind Your Ponies.
Favorite band?
U2.
Water ski or snow ski?
Water ski and snow ski. Sorry, but I love them both.
First Attorney General for North Dakota was James Morris, George Goodwin, or Thomas McHugh?
Thomas McHugh?
George Goodwin, though. George Goodwin. We got one of them. Don't worry about it. I had Armstrong up here, and he butchered about 4 of them. He couldn't get it. So
I know one of my predecessors way back when was Leslie Burgum, who's related to the governor. So get this. So they're related, and I heard that just like a couple days rather before I got there, and I end up in the office, and there's on the shelf there's this little wooden sign that says North Dakota. And no kidding, I'm looking at it, and it's way up on the shelf, and I got up there, hold the thing down, I look at it, and it's a name tag from a conference, but it's made of wood, and it says North Dakota, and it's really pretty. I look in the back, it says Brenton Wood Conference, New Hampshire, 1955, I think that it was. And I was like, son of a gun. I flipped it over, and on the other side, it's got a little plate, North Dakota Attorney General Leslie Burgum. Yeah, and they misspelled the name too. So I brought that across the hall and gave that to the governor, which he's got in his office. But so that was one of my long ago predecessors that I became aware of. But yeah, I didn't know the first one.
No,
it's not quite like not knowing the father of our country, but maybe.
Yeah, well, it's a Google machine. I mean, we had to search that one out too, so it's not like that one was at the tip of our tongue.
Well, I'll guarantee you the next, I feel privileged to be the 30th Attorney General in North Dakota's history, and someday there'll be 30 more will come and go, and none of them are going to, when they're here, your successors and they're doing their podcast, none of them are going to be, they're going to say, well, 30 ago, who was that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Great stuff, Drew. It's going to be one that a lot of views are going to be had at, and I don't know if you have any last parting thoughts.
I don't. We really appreciate the support of the public and the men and women in uniform, but also the other work that we do in the office, which is so important. We work on gaming regulation. We work on consumer fraud issues and a host of other matters there. We're really proud of all the work of the office. My background is criminal prosecution, but also civil representation of the United States, but now the state of North Dakota. We want to hear from people about the job they think that we're doing. We sincerely do. And, if you're in the Capitol, stop in and say hi.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Yeah, we appreciate that. So you guys make sure to share this thing as Mikey gets it fired up here. I know he's going to be trying hard at it to get it out. This is episode 10. Episode 11 is going to be dual purpose dog, canine handler, Jaden Peters, local, born and raised guy, Trinity grad, coming in. But subscribe to the podcast, everybody. Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music, YouTube channel, our Facebook page. Chief Dossinger, you got anything for him?
Enjoy March.
Amen. So thanks, everybody.